Okay, we'll get started. Well, I welcome you all again. I encourage you again to just keep leaving your details in the chat, and then we can get started right away. This webinar is supposed to go up to 5:30 p.m. East African time, and so we're going to try to work within that time range to make sure that everything goes according to program. So I'm just going to do a small round of introduction of the paper, and then our first speaker, who is Favor, will come in, and then the two keynote speakers will have a round of questions and answer, and then we'll wrap it up. I just wanted to mention that I think that this paper is very seminal, important in because of the fact that it has been probing at gender through the three parts the different parts that it has been released, from the very first paper, which was looking at the structures of AI on the continent, and to the other paper, the second paper, which was looking at the threats and benefits of AI, particularly with reference to African women and different sectors on the continent, to this last paper, which is looking at how AI is the lived experiences of African AI researchers, women in particular. I think it is very important in the sense that this paper has taken an Afrofeminist perspective in questioning the issue of gender, which looks at what does it mean to be an African woman in the world today in relation to this emerging technology of artificial intelligence. So I think that from the Afrofeminist perspective of which talks about the importance of knowledge production and us being able to come up with our own narratives and stories and systemic analysis of how we are positioned in the world today is very important in decentering the dominant knowledge systems that have for long entrenched the inequality of Black women, especially in relation to technologies, but also just every other inequalities that places us at the bottom tier of society and globally today. So I think in as much as we're here to discuss the paper, Pivots, Perseverances, and Pleasures today, I think this paper is also actually the three-part series of African women in AI is very much also generally a celebration of an Afrofeminist body of work that probes these issues, that's asking about these very important issues and charting a way forward in terms of solutions to these emerging problems from this emerging technology. And I would say kudos to Favor and policy and everyone else on the call, because I know it's people who are working within the system, within the same frameworks. And I welcome you. I welcome you all. And I think Favor, you can take the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, yes, my camera is on. Thank you so much, Bobina, for that amazing introduction. And thank you all today for registering and attending our dissemination webinar. I also want to say a quick thank you as well to our speakers, invited speakers, Nina and Aisha, who are here at the moment and who have joined us, and also to Maital, Bonita, Nima, Garnet, Sandra, everyone who has contributed to the development of these papers, and the comms team at Policy, and everyone who has supported in the publicity and in everything that we are here to do today. So very briefly, I will talk about the paper and some of the most interesting findings, to my mind, as we progress. So next slide, please. Okay, so I don't know if you had the chance to look at the very first slide, and if you'd had the chance to look at all the images in the report, but they were all generated with Hugging Faces text to image generator. And the work of developing these illustrations was done by our ED, Nima. And I thought it was just a very nice touch to have, I guess, an AI report with illustrations that were generated via an image generator, with the oversight and overview and the editing and revising done by a human. I think that it's an apt illustration of what AI and human collaborations ought to be. And okay, next slide, please. Okay, so very briefly, I'd like to talk about the origin of this project. And it began last year with my colleague, Sandra, who had this amazing idea to talk about AI in the impact of AI on women in Africa. And in her words, she was startled that there was so little literature, there was so little talk about the impact of AI on African women. And so this gap, which she observed, led us to further develop the initial paper, which she had put together and which went on to become the 3 reports that we now have. And we were curious about the impact of AI on women and the experiences of African women in AI as well. And we're also curious about the gendered impacts of AI in Africa, because it seems like there's a lot of talk about development and how technology can be used for development purposes. And it seems like a lot of talk was about development in this very vague, amorphous form that did not seem to consider very much what the potential impact would be on vulnerable groups in the society. And our first 2 reports explored the impact of AI on women. We talked about colonization and its impact, and how AI colonization is a new phase of past the colonization of the African continent. We also talked about the importance of ethical considerations and the various intersections of the identities of women in Africa, and how this meant that they will be exposed to the various impacts of AI in different ways. And this current report focuses on the experiences of African women who work in AI. So next slide, please. Yes, our objectives were to understand their experiences. We wanted to highlight their challenges as well, and we wanted to identify and promote mutually discovered recommendations for resolving the challenges which had been identified, and who the necessary stakeholders who would be responsible for resolving these challenges would be. Next slide, please. Okay, so the nationality of our respondents came from Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Tunisia, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Mauritius. We tried to capture speakers who were French speaking and English speaking. Regrettably, we were not able to successfully reach out to women in the southern region of Africa due to time constraints, and due to I believe the busy schedules of some of the respondents which we had identified and which we wanted to speak with. Next slide, please. And then the areas and fields of expertise of the women we worked with were natural language processing, agriculture, academia, climate change, tourism, and health. And Next slide, please. Okay, so our study limitations were that we found that there was a smaller pool of respondents than we initially anticipated. So initially we were hoping to have 11 in-depth interviews, and we were hoping to have 11 independent, excuse me, 11 in-depth interviews, and then go on to have one or two focus group discussions with 6 to 8 participants in each. But we found that the number of people that we were able to reach out to and who were able to respond to us constituted a smaller number than we had anticipated. And we also found that there were way more respondents in health and in agriculture than in certain fields like energy and transportation. So this was also part of why we did not interview anybody from Southern Africa, because we found that the respondents we identified and who had been referred to us by other women we interviewed already worked in health and in agriculture and in natural language processing and in some of these fields. And there was also an overrepresentation of respondents from countries like Nigeria, which I must attribute to bias myself. And next slide, please. Okay, and interestingly, after we conducted our research, I stumbled across this research which had been carried out by CPIT, and it seemed to reflect what we had found in the course of our research, that they were just that the most heavily, I guess, fields where you'd find the most representation in AI, both for men and for women, were agriculture, healthcare, and general software and IT services. Meanwhile, fields like transportation, if you look at the side of the lady in this picture, it says that there just 1% of AI professionals, women AI professionals in Africa, work in transportation. So I guess that explains why we weren't able to find anyone, and why I think we found about 2 or 3, but they did not respond to our emails. I must have to believe that their schedules must have been very busy, probably. But we weren't able to find very many people in this particular field. And next slide, please. So to begin with, our participants shared with us how they came to learn about AI and how they got into the field of AI. As if you remember the previous slide, it shows that majority of professionals, AI professionals, both men and women, work in IT and software services generally. And this certainly was reflected in our reports, because many of our respondents said that they were able to move into AI because they were already working in software engineering, or they were coding, or they were doing something else that just made it easy for them to transition once they got the opportunity. And another respondent shared that she just developed an interest in AI because she said she was going through job descriptions, and she said she found them interesting and something that she could give a shot. And that was how she pivoted, essentially. And then some other respondents shared that they got into AI due to online courses and summer schools that someone invited them for, or that they were required to attend due to their work, and stuff like that. So that was a representation of how this pivot was made. And yes, so next slide, please. And so talking about the pleasures which we discovered amongst our researchers, all of them were happy about the fact that they were working in AI, or that they were doing something to support women in AI. I remember this lady, an academic from Mauritius, and she said that she's happy because of the work she's doing. She works in something related to bioinformatics, and also so she researches breast cancer essentially. She said because she has found a way to include AI in her work, she has found it easy to get grants for her research, and her research has become more visible. She has received international acclaim. Then she also, another pleasure has been career opportunities. A lot of our respondents said that working in AI has given them the opportunity to do something different from what they initially set out to do. There's our respondent from Tunisia shared that she works with GIZ. So because she works, even though she's not an AI researcher or technologist, she feels very fulfilled that she's able to work with an institution that provides funding to women-led businesses in AI. And then networks and communities that have been built. I know a couple such as Women in Machine Learning and Data Science, She Codes Africa, and there are a number of others as well. And our respondents shared that they enjoy the friendships that they've been able to develop, that our respondent from Tanzania, I remember her saying that even though there are so few women, that the few of them which exist or which work in this field hold themselves tight and provide comforts for each other in the course of their work. And then productivity as well. AI helps. It's one of the things that we talk about as it relates to AI, that it's basically iterates away repetitive tasks that people don't want to deal with. And mentorship as well. Our respondents shared that working in AI has given them the opportunity to help their students, that they feel proud of the fact that due to the expertise that they have developed in AI, they are able to supervise students and mentor them. And these students go on to work with other companies, to go into the academia, and they are generally successful. So that's a brief overview of what the pleasures are, or what the pleasures have been. And now we'll go to the next slide, which are the perseverances. This section basically talks about what the challenges African women working in AI have experienced in the course of their work. And I guess this quote says it all. The students I supervise are scrutinized more compared to other students. They get very tough treatment just because their supervisor is a woman. Interestingly, when we're trying to decide on the title for this report, I almost immediately settled on a quote made by our respondent from Tanzania. She said that whenever her students present work, whenever they present something that they have coded or they have developed, they get told that a male developer has coded this for you. So and our respondent from Tanzania was our very first interview that we had last year in December. And I immediately latched on that statement and I was like, yes, this is going to be the title of this report. A male developer has coded this for you. So it's a very apt representation of the challenge that many women in the field face, that their work is unacknowledged, unsupported, and some of the reasons are related to patriarchy and social norms. There's the idea that women are expected to do certain things or carry out certain roles in society and at home. And very often this traditional idea is in no way related to working in AI as a technologist, an engineer, or even a data scientist or anything like that. So this social norms often impede women who work in this space. And then work and life balance. This is of course related to patriarchy and social norms. The idea that women have to be home by a certain time, and many of us respondents shared that, you know, as a woman, you have to ensure that your home life does not suffer, that you have to be there for your children, you have to cook for your husband, you have to ensure that you're able to do both of these things at the same time. And that was definitely, although actually many of our respondents interestingly did not view this to be a challenge, but upon closer inspection, upon further questioning, they said, one of our respondents reviewed that she was very relieved that her son, her last child, had now gone off to the university, and that she now had time to pursue her research and go into this research much more deeply and in depth. So it's just an interesting example of how requirements made upon women sometimes pose challenges to their work. And then there's also the problem of low representation and diversity. There's the fact that very few women are in the field, and there are more men. And so what it means is that women in the workplace would be in the minority and feel alienated and unwanted. There's this theory called the pipeline, the leaky pipeline, which expresses how at various stages of progress in career-wise, there are various leaks that through which researchers or women in tech, in STEM, often leave the field. So of course it would begin at the secondary school level, and then from in between, at that point where you move on from secondary school to the university, there are already some ladies or women who already choose to, one, not go to the university, or two, choose not to go into technology or engineering or STEM fields, or who perhaps not because they have chosen to, but due to the availability of resources, due to whatever policies, are not able to progress, and there are usually fewer women than men. And then upon graduation from the university, even fewer women choose to practice, and even fewer women go on to pursue postgraduate degrees. And then the few women who do manage to graduate and get employment find that they are the minority. They feel isolated. Working in tech spaces is often hostile, misogynistic. Their capabilities are not supported, and there is a general belief that they are not very capable, that they have coasted on the support of other people, that they are diversity tokens. So little wonder that there is little representation and diversity in the field. And then, of course, because there is little representation and diversity, mentorship is also very hard to come about. If you're in Africa, you would find that very often your mentor or whoever it is that might be advising you or that you're looking up to might not be a woman, or it might not even be somebody in Africa. It might be someone in the UK or the US or India or Germany, countries where there are more professionals, AI professionals. And this, of course, the challenges of trying to set up meetings, scheduling, different conflicting time zones also takes a toll. And there's also the problem of brain drain and resource barriers. And you have to think about how so many women in this field often have to leave Africa to work in other countries. And you can see it in, one of the women that we wanted to reach out to interview actually replied that she would be unable to attend the meeting, schedule a meeting with us because she was relocating to Canada at the time we were speaking. And so many of the speakers were not even in Africa at the time of the interview anymore. So this is also a problem. Then there's also resource barriers. African women in AI need, just like everyone else, they need access to the internet. And the internet access is in many parts of Africa and all over Africa is very, very expensive. And you also need access to data sets and data in order to train your models, in order to do the research that you need to do. But very often, the data does not exist, or where it exists, it is siloed up somewhere. It is under the, it belongs to some private company somewhere or some government agency somewhere, and you need to pay money that you do not have to access it. The data might be available and accessible, but it is non-machine readable. So it is written in text, in pen and paper somewhere in some dusty cabinet somewhere. So it is not available online. You cannot search with your, you cannot press Ctrl F, so to speak, to search anything that you're looking for because maybe it is a scan or it is in paper. And also minimal technology adoption means that a lot of processes in many parts of Africa by our agencies, by many corporations are still run manually. And so there is fewer opportunities for internships, not a lot of opportunities for researchers who are hoping to gain experience to actually do what they want to do. And then education-wise, many of our respondents shared that you have to take online courses. You need to leave your country and travel to a neighboring country. The African, I think, International Masters in maths, someone should correct me if I'm not getting that right, AIMS, was one frequent program that a couple of our respondents had attended, and they had to leave their countries. So one respondent left Ghana to Cameroon, another respondent left Cameroon to Ghana, and there was also another school, I think another lady left Cameroon for Rwanda to be able to attend the program, while some just leave the continent entirely just to get the knowledge and necessary resources. Of course, traveling is also not very easy for Africans. There are numerous difficulties involved with collecting or acquiring, being approved for visas to some of the countries that you need to go. And geography is also a barrier. Our respondent from Mauritius shared that the nature of Mauritius being an island country means that they are quite isolated from the rest of the world. So I remember I was telling her that I've heard so much about Mauritius that I'd like to relocate and move there. And she told me that she doesn't know what I have heard, but that Mauritius is quite an isolated island country, and that this means that a lot of research, she researches breast cancer, as I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of research that is not readily available or accessible due to that reason. And language barriers as well. One of our respondents who spoke French from Cameroon shared that when she went for a master's in Ghana, it took a while for her to be able, the fact that English is the official language of Ghana was a challenge for her because she has spoken French all her life. So even though she understood English, it was still something of a hurdle that she had to cross while studying. So that's just a very brief overview of some of the challenges and some of the issues that working in this space African women need to persevere through. And under patriarchy and social norms, I suddenly remembered our respondent from Rwanda who shared that she's an entrepreneur and she's currently building a business in that uses AI. But in the past, she mentioned that she had organized seminars and trainings for women to learn digital skills. And I remember her saying very regretfully that you'd spend so much money putting up facilities and training and money to train your students, but then all of a sudden after a while they no longer come because their fathers and their husbands and the men in their lives have instructed them not to return to the classes that you've spent so much money developing for them. So that's also another example of how patriarchal institutions and social norms regarding what women should do and what women should not do means that many African women are unable to work in AI. Next slide, please. Okay, so our recommendations and conclusions were to the government, to civil society, to technologists, and to VCs. So our respondents shared that they believe that the government had the duty to ensure that education was expanded at all levels to cater for training in digital skills. That the education system in Africa at present is not suitable or sufficient to ensure that people who want to work in AI are trained adequately. They also believe that the government also had a duty to employ local talent. So African governments should not leave talent available in their own countries and go to Europe or Asia, other countries, and import technological services into Africa when there are so many other amazing, talented technologists who can solve their problem for probably even less than they pay foreign companies. Then so civil society have a duty to educate themselves or advocate more about the needs of African women in technology, and technologists and VCs, companies that work in this space that employ AI in delivering their services have a duty to contribute to training women in developing AI and data science skills. This can be done through organizing internships, summer schools, and such initiatives. It's part of their civil CSO, giving back to the public. And another recommendation was for VCs, that is venture capitalists, people who provide funding and sponsorship to startups to ensure that there are clauses embedded in what they do that support women-led businesses, women-run businesses, and to ensure that they contribute to the development of this talent. So, next slide, please. So, and with that, we've come to the end of this to the end of our overview of the dissemination of our reports. Thank you so much for sticking with us and for listening. And please don't hesitate to drop your questions. And now I'll hand the mic back over to Bobina. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that elaborate overview of the report, Favor. In the interest of time, because we're looking time bad right now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Like Favor said, please leave all the questions you might have in the chat, and they'll be responded to at the end of after every speaker has gone over their presentation. So allow me to welcome our next speaker, our first keynote speaker, Nina Dehora. Nina is a scientist, and she identifies herself
as an anti-racist hacker. She's passionate about science, and she researches justice and ethics in AI. Nina, you're welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Bobina. Thanks, Favor, for inviting me to this discussion. And congrats, the research is very important for us here in Brazil. I'm from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. I'm a computer scientist and hacker anti-racist. I'm trying to train my English. It's not easy. I know Portuguese is not easy too, but I will try. I will share my screen because I prepare some slides about my last project. Um, okay. Do you see my screen? Okay. Um, Here in Brazil, I worked and I work now, until now, in ethics in AI. I investigated algorithmic racism in face recognition because here in Brazil we have many problems with this technology from AI. So I prepared some example how we fight against this technology here in Brazil, and what's the purpose about this situation and this complex situation. And I think it's a good example to use in the other countries. First, I have some works. My main work is in responsible tech. So I'm trying to help Black computer scientists and indigenous scientists from Brazil and in the other countries create some ways to decolonize technologies. And my first approach is from responsible tech. So I studied about bias in algorithm, bias in AI, cybersecurity, and I'm trying to apply in these different labs here in Brazil. Okay. Gabi, thanks. Do you see my screen? All screen or only?
We can see the janela do apresentador on the screen. So either just close that the pop-up.
Oh yeah. Oh, now. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Gabi. Thanks. And okay, I was explaining about my works here in Brazil, and my motivation for this project. It's easy for me. Computer scientists need to be concerned about the social aspects of their creation. So developments, technologies, and AI developers needed to be more open to rethink your creation. So this is my main motivation for this research. And the problem, racism in algorithms isn't a computational problem, but in Brazil and in the other countries like United States, and I think some place in Africa continent too, main technologies think that these problems is only a computational problem. this is a big problem, because this is not create a possibility to rethink AI together and with more Black people in this era. So this is a big problem here in Brazil. And about machine learning, I want to explain machine learning, but I will try to connect my research with the results in this situation. Machine learning works now like a statistical error, with statistical error. Many AI developers only compare algorithmic models to understand some realities or some contexts, and have a man have a mental, have a critical mental about metrics, because metrics in this situation of machine learning is very important. But I have some criticals about this. And the responsibility is only to algorithms. This is insane, because algorithms is created by humans. So the responsibility is not to algorithms, it's this, and yes by humans. So what it should be? In my research, I'm trying to create a dystopian reality where we worry about the best of the data that we're using. So in facial recognition, we have many problematics with the data images and the data sets, because we have many data sets with a problematic messages by Black people. So here in Brazil, for example, in public security, many data sets is biased. How this what this means? Me, for example, it's a person here in Brazil that have a man possibilities that will be arrested because I'm a Black woman with a cut hair. So this is a problematic, because my image, my face, is red with this. It's red like this. And the debate of the impacts of technology on society is important before to create technologies. So I'm trying to put this on the main debate of the main steps on responsible tech. Has the racial debate involved with technology? What are the negative and positive impacts? So this is important to be discussed with everyone in technology, not only with how can I say it in English, because it's problematic here in Brazil. I will try to explain. We have a different perspective about racial debate here in Brazil. One of these perspectives is about how to create a good environment to Black people create technologies. But here, the situation here is the Black people doesn't have the opportunities to development and to decide how to create this environment in technology. Only white people have this opportunity. So this is specific here in Brazil. This question is specific in Brazil because we need to fight more how to create possibilities to discuss negative and positive impacts and create a good environment for this. And I changed the question because it's important to think what's the human responsibility or what's the main responsibility in technology development is not only for developers, but it's basically for everyone that use and creates technologies. Okay, this is some example about facial recognition. And here we use a lot in bank situation, in public security, in schools too, and some libraries. So it's have a large use here in Brazil. The main ethical use that I studied is about no identification of the Black face, association of Black people to crimes through phenotype. This is really dangerous, and mass surveillance for lack of transparency. I divide some slides to explain this. I break the problem in 3 steps. The first, I studied about surveillance and slavery here in Brazil, and I'm trying to compare with other countries. So after this, I studied 2 points about invisibility of Black scientists and Black technologies, and how to photography can contribute to understanding of image algorithms. So we have a past where photography had many problems with Blackface, and this is not visibility in images algorithm studies. So I'm trying to I'm trying to create a visibility about this situation photograph before talking about facial recognition in my work. In surveillance and slavery, I have some example. I put this example because the Black Lives Matter, the year of the Black Lives Matter, we had a many use to track the activists, and I think in Uganda, I think in Uganda have some use from drones too. So this is an example how to surveillance and slavery work together, and how to capitalism and the white people create this possibility in this present and a problem in the future. Invisibility of Black scientists and technologies, and this is like from African and Africa continent and from diaspora, and have this image to exemplify about how this invisibility possibility of surveillance and slavery, because we don't have a possibility to create new opportunities in technology and create new tools to fight against these problems. It is important we try to continue in technology era and change how can I be the future in this situation. And I have a problematic data because the main method in facial recognition was created for a statistical and eugenist person, Francis Galton, was one of the pioneers in facial analysis and created the method to analyze a crime from phenotype, and this is constantly used in facial recognition. And 2 years ago, some scientists used this problematic work, to automate the cameras for criminality in China, some places in United States, in some places in Brazil. So how this continue impacted our people, and this is only a example about a difference in analog images and digital images, and how this contributes to problematic in facial recognition. So in 2017, Apple was accused of racism after a young Chinese unlocked his mom's iPhone X. And this happened here in Brazil too recently, with two black black men, but they don't visibility this problem. But I saw in real time this happens in 2022. So this is a continual problem, and this is only I'm trying to explain how this happens, because we have a main methods to divide the images before use some AI algorithms. So in the first slide, Favor said about the software by OpenAI and the other software by Google that created some abstract images. And in this situation of facial recognition and image recognition, we have some methods to divide the images and divide the data set to prepare for algorithmic classification. In this situation, algorithmic opacity and behavior manipulation is two important points to thinking about how we can hack this process, because we have some ways to change this. I'm trying to think this some actions to decolonize the algorithms and decolonize the process of facial recognition. It's important to me say, and I'm totally agree with banning facial recognition in our society. This is technology that I will not save this technology, but I'm trying to create some steps, some actions to think how to hacking this technology and AI technology. We needed to think who creates the technologies now, and who created the technologies in the past, to think more on how to put diversity and inclusive methods in AI technology, but think more how we can develop more tools against these present technologies. Whose responsibility is it? So this is main problematic, because we don't have people responsible people not responsible about the negative consequence from technology. I defend social computer science, not only computer science. So I think it is important to create a new era in computer science that possibility other activists, communicators, people from law, people from politics, create technologies too, and how to analyze social problems without technology. Before create technology to solve social problems, we need to analyze the social problems without this technology. And in the same time, I created and participated some projects. The first is Onguye Podcast, is a podcast about African and diaspora scientists. I created 2 years ago, and only history and with the purpose to positive impact our area. And Science Complete and I participate in Science Club in Brazil to create new environments for young Black scientists and young Black technologists. So this is my presentation. Thanks so much to invite me, and is this.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Wow, Nina. I really enjoyed listening to you. I think some of the things I was just thinking to myself, wow, I don't think I'd heard about some of those things. But for example, the idea of social computer science, I think is really powerful in terms of approaching, the systemic injustices in these technologies, because we constantly question where do the algorithms go wrong, but ultimately it's humans who are putting together these algorithms. So I think that was a great presentation. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I will invite our next speaker. I see we're already running out of time, so I'll just invite our next speaker, Aishatu Gwadabe. Aishatu is a peace technologist, and it's a pleasure to have you be a part of this conversation. Aishatu, the floor is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this great webinar. I'm really honored to be here to speak to you and to share a bit about my journey. My name is Aishatu Gwadabe. I'm from Nigeria originally, from the Hausa tribe. As you can see behind me, I put an image of a building that has a lot of ornamental design in it. One of it is called Arewa, which means unity in diversity. I thought it was really fitting, so I wanted to put it behind me as well, as it shapes really who I am and why I'm interested in the specific topics in AI that I want to present to you. I will share my screen and then we're gonna get started. One moment. So. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here and to share with you who I am. I'm a peace technologist. I'm also a critical AI ethicist. I'm an AI artist. I wear many hats. I'm a writer. I'm an experimental designer. I'm a conversational AI designer. I'm also really passionate about research in the area of exponential technologies. And later on, I will share some of the links in the chat. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, I'm always happy to make new connections. Okay, you can all see my screen real, I think. Okay. I'm on the list of top 100 brilliant women in AI ethics 2022. I felt really honored to be part of that list. And it shows really my main focus has been a lot on AI ethics and how I can combine it with art to raise awareness about the many issues that arise with the use and development of AI. Another thing that's really important to know about me, I introduced myself as a peace technologist because peace is really the compass that guides me in whatever I do. I currently work for the GIZ project. I worked for many years also in a cross-border GIZ project in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Benin. On a cross-border conflict between nomadic cattle herders and sedentary farmers. At the moment, I work on the peace process in Yemen and focus mainly on finding digital and creative approaches to peace building. When it comes to, of course, peace technology, a very new field, it's really interesting how you can use big data to solve many problems in the world. However, one of the many things I noticed in my journey was that AI could be used to prevent violent conflicts, but we cannot even develop these tools because we do not have the data sets. So really being part of being in a continent that has over 2,000 languages and most of them are, or the majority are low resourced, it makes it really difficult to harness the power of AI for good. But first, let me start with showing you a little bit about how I use AI for peace. I introduced myself as an AI artist. I'm a visual artist. I do illustrations and I design pieces of art, but I have this human-machine collaboration with AI where I use it to create patterns, to combine patterns that I infuse or embed in my illustrations. And here I participated, or I was invited to do an exhibition at the Mozilla Festival this year, and I named it Quantum Visions of African Futurism, Allegories of AI. And the main focus was really to question, what is knowledge, How can we depict knowledge in pictures and what can they tell us about how we see the world? And how can images themselves contribute towards generating new knowledge? One of the art pieces I created was called African Epistemology that I wanted to share with you as well. I use art really to spark discussions about, what it means to be a human, and here with African epistemology, it's really about questioning the dominance of Western knowledge systems and how when we also develop AI, we have to think about developing AI from an African perspective. What would that look like? What kind of tools would we develop? How would we create conversational AI applications? For what purposes would we use them? I think it's really important to spark these discussions, and oftentimes I find that there is a low threshold for really understanding what AI is. So for me, when I think about science fiction and AI and anything that has to do with the future, one thing that I think about always in the beginning is that when I was growing up in Germany, there weren't so many Black people at that time. If you go to read a book about the future or about science fiction, you find that there are no leading figures that are Black in those books. How can you imagine a future when even in the imagination we do not exist? And that's why I find African futurism such interesting approach to also combine with AI to think about or to show we exist in the future as well, not also in our imagination. And that's where we start to develop new tools, if we can imagine being part of the future. So here's just a screenshot of the virtual art exhibition. I tried to tackle different topics with these 4 images. One is called Misclassified Bride. Another one is called Green AI Revolution, where I wanted to raise awareness about the impact of language models on the environment. So these are just some impressions I wanted to share with you. And here another one, I know you shared how you used DALL-E to create your report. I thought that was really brilliant. Here I want to share with you something. Like if you write the word bride, you will see that it generates images of women that are wearing traditionally Western bridal gowns, and all of them are white women as well. And with my artwork, Misclassified Bride, I wanted to just raise awareness about the fact that in non-Western cultures, people wear different kind of clothes as bridal gowns, but an AI would not classify this woman as a bride. It would misclassify her. And it's really important that we ask ourselves, why doesn't it see other non-Western persons as people, as brides? Like, if you would use AI to search or to classify this picture, it would not even recognize it as a woman, as a bride. It would only classify it as people, even in a plural form. So it's really interesting, I think, that people all over the world start to reflect on what that means. If we are not being included in the data sets that are used to generate these images, if AI is not capable even to include us in those outputs, what implications does that have? And I use art as a vehicle to really demystify AI, to take away the fear that many people have about understanding what it is about. So basically, I've been preserving also Hausa culture with exponential technologies. And here, what I mean with exponential technologies, that are technologies that are exponentially growing, like AI, blockchain technology, virtual reality, augmented reality. So just to give you also some insights into the ethical considerations, it's really important that when culture is preserved in the metaverse or through technological means, that it's important to know that who is recreating these works, these spaces online, digitally, how it's different if an African uses technology to save culture, because that what we might consider important, significant to preserve might not be deemed as important or a site or as an antiquity recognized as important to be preserved. So just to give you an example, I've created a virtual reality gallery with my artwork, and I based it on actual buildings that exist in the Hausa culture. As I mentioned, I'm originally from Nigeria, from the Hausa and Fulani tribe, and the Hausa people have these really interesting architectural buildings, and I used that as an inspiration to really replicate it in the metaverse and preserve it, the design, the ornamental design, and also everything that really would render such a building as realistic as possible. Here are some more images of those buildings that you can see. And here you can see one of the screenshots I took from the metaverse of my gallery. I put a baobab tree in the middle because I felt like we need to also preserve the nature that marks the African landscape. And the baobab tree, one of the oldest trees in the that can age for more than thousands of years. To preserve that in the metaverse is also interesting. So you can see I preserved the ornamental design, the architectural particularities, and yeah, trying to share this with people, invite people. I do I do tours in my gallery where I talk about the culture, about the significance of every detail. Yeah, this is basically one of the main inspirations for that gallery that I created. And here also another screenshot of one room that is made of 24 karat gold. And this artwork is called Aska Bio. I used one of the traditional clothes that are worn by Hausa men, and I made an artwork out of the design. Yeah, I was inspired by so many different yeah, parts of it. So let me just go now to how I use technology for peace. There's so many different ways how you can use AI for good. You can use it for conflict prediction. You could use it for social justice. You could use it to preserve language, and you can use it for edutainment. Edutainment is the combination of education and entertainment. As I mentioned before, I'm highly influenced by peace and how I could use it to prevent conflict on the African continent. And I was part of a lab that was called Leading with Artificial Intelligence. And the main goal was to really identify how we can use artificial intelligence to better prepare for future transformational development. It was financed by a German cooperation, by the Global Leadership Academy, by Fair Forward, a program by the GIZ, and also the International Training Center of the ILO. And there were participants from all over the world, from all continents, all age groups represented. And my focus was on developing a solution for Sustainable Development Goal number 16, which is about peace, justice, and strong institutions. At the time, I was working on the cross-border conflict between nomadic cattle herders and the Fulani and the farmers in Benin and Niger, Burkina Faso. And so I thought, okay, wouldn't it be interesting to develop a conflict prediction tool that can help international organizations and local initiatives identify hotspots for conflict? What if we could predict where conflict could happen in the future? This is really important that we develop such tools, because we can see there's a trend that by 2030, over 70.8 million people will have left their homes due to conflict or disaster. And there will be a lot of conflict-driven or crisis-driven conflicts that we could prevent. So to build really peaceful, just, and inclusive society, what we need is a commitment to preventing all forms of violence, whether they're found in the home, in the community, in the society. So my goal was then, as part of the participant, a member of this leadership lab, to develop this Hausa NLP early warning system. But when I was thinking about it, and that was the first time I was engaging with the topic of language and AI. That's when I realized, oh, there are not enough data sets out there for me to develop anything like this. I know how to develop it. I know the steps. I would know what kind of team I would have to get put together. But I cannot even develop this because Hausa is a low resource language, despite having over 150 million speakers, which is incredible, right? To see so many speakers, but no data set to develop a speech recognition tool that could listen into radio data to identify patterns. So that's when I got really into researching AI for language preservation, and this issue of low resource languages on the African continent And language preservation is so important because at the moment, over 52 African languages have already undergone language death. As you might know, there's so many languages on the African continent, many of which are unique dialects that need to be preserved. And the reason why this is so important is because language is a means for many African cultures to preserve their history, their memories. Their culture is basically encoded in language. There are so many historical events saved in oral literature. If you do not preserve this, it will be disappearing. So I've been really advocating for this, talking about this topic wherever I can, and thinking about what can be done. How can we ensure that people in the global south are not left behind? So what's next in my AI journey? I've done a lot of different things. Due to time constraints, I couldn't cover everything I do, of course. I mentioned earlier, I work also as a conversation AI designer. I participated in a competition where I developed a prototype for a chatbot game. I work also in game design, so I developed a chatbot game that is aiming to talk about the Fulani people, and oftentimes during the conflict that I worked in, they're discriminated against, their culture is misunderstood. So I created the storyline where the player interacts with a young Fulani woman, young Fulani girl that shares a bit about her culture, and you have this conversation with this girl who is the AI, basically. So what's next? I recently last year participated in a workshop called Parables of AI in and from the Global South. And there was a call for submissions, 15 writers, researchers, AI enthusiasts were chosen. I was one of them. And the goal was to write stories from the Global South that can serve as parables of AI. As one of the only African writers, I chose to write a parable of AI that focuses on, of course, this idea of ancestral AI. What would that look like, you know? And I created a story that is basically trying to highlight how could we use chatbots to preserve our culture? How could we use it in the future to teach the younger generation about their culture? How could a chatbot, what would such a chatbot look like? Would it be maybe a chatbot that inhabits kind of the characteristics of the elders? So this is basically a story I wrote. It will be published later this year, sometime in October, November. And I'm planning to also do a oral version, like an audio version of the story, because I want to really root it in this oral storytelling tradition. Another thing, before I conclude this presentation, I told you before, I'm very passionate about preserving language with AI. And in order to look into that, I've been working now on a project that I'm developing on how to preserve Hausa proverbs through machine learning. And here I really want to explore how can we develop language corpora for low resource languages in the Global South that are based on a decolonial and gender sensitive lens. Oftentimes with a lot of data sets, what I noticed, they lack the gender sensitivity. And what I mean by that is having a decolonial or gender sensitive lens starts already with the data set. So if you have language data sets and we want to annotate them, we need to develop annotation guidelines that include this kind of reflection of, for instance, many translations that happen always have the masculine generics as the default. We have to include words like, if you have the word cameraman, for instance, there should be also camerawoman as an option, or at least plural form that is more inclusive for all kinds of genders. So I'm really interested in exploring that more and developing an annotation guideline that looks into that, and to use Hausa proverbs as a case study to create a quality corpus, a parallel corpus for Hausa English proverbs. Yeah, it's still in the development process, but this is like the biggest new endeavor that I want to focus on. And I hope that it can help other languages also in maybe following the blueprint to also preserve their proverbs, because at least in the Hausa language, proverbs are used metaphorically to preserve wisdom, sayings, also some kind of historical events. So I'm hoping to preserve that for the younger generation that might not know about them, and for people who live in the diaspora to learn more about it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Oh, wow. That was really, really amazing. Just hearing everything you've had to say. I think you shared so much with us. I think everyone here has had like a lot to take away. It's unbelievable the magnitude of work you're doing. I share too. It's really interesting. It's a lot of things I know at Police we've been trying to do, like the Web3 art, and particularly here in Uganda, I would say I don't think there is a lot happening on the front like what you're doing back home. I think that's really interesting, but also with the language and the coloniality. I think my colleagues, I think on the call as well, Maytal and Jason they've put out a paper around that, and they're doing some work around that. And I think it's really interesting. And I think you're very daring. I can tell from you're just trying to do it and getting out there and getting it done. I think it's been an honor listening to you. And I think we definitely would want to keep in touch and just keep exchanging. I think there is a lot to learn from you. It's been an honor. Thank you very
so much for having me.
Yeah.
I just want to say one last thing. A lot of the projects that I work on are just experiments that I do on my own or with other people. I do them to show, you can do things on your own. You can just try and see what happens. It's so important to just have the courage to do it.
No, that's a big takeaway, I would say, for all of us, because I think many times, especially in spaces like these, which are just, very fresh, avant-garde, it feels like trying is a little too much. And so I think it's very encouraging to know that you could just go out there and actually get this done. So it's been great listening to you. I think we'll just move straight to the questions and answers, and then we can wrap this up because of time. So we already have questions in the chat. Favor, I don't know if you want to take the first question. All right, we have a question from Odomaro Mubanjizi. Have African governments worked on some gender policies on AI, just as some did before on gender mainstreaming? The issue of access is crucial. Given the potential of AI to revolutionize workforce through machine learning and robotics, how can AI be embraced to deconstruct how we perceive work that has generally been defined along gender stereotypes? Favor, do you want to take that?
Okay, well, I will try to answer these questions to the best of my knowledge. So, beginning with the second question, how can AI be embraced to deconstruct how we perceive work that has generally been defined along gender stereotypes? So I think that problem is, as and Aisha too was talking about, and Nina, as well how already existing biases that exist in the real world become embedded in AI and AI data sets. So the problem, well, the problem is twofold. These problems exist in the real world and they are being replicated through AI. And there are a lot of efforts that are being developed to eradicate some of these biases. Nina, for instance, puts forward a suggestion that we need to think about the past, where we are coming from, and we need to think about the present, and that this thinking about this would give us a fuller understanding of what issues are, and then guide efforts towards resolving this challenge. And also there is also the problem of well, just yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, I was speaking with somebody about how, you know, when you use Google Translate, some non-gendered words, for instance, or if you're translating from a language that does not have how do you say it, that uses neutral pronouns, for instance, and you translate to English. Let's say the word is doctor. It's and when you translate it to English, you get the translation you get seems to indicate that the person being referred to is a man. But then when you translate a word in that other language to English, like nurse, you get she, for instance. And this is just an example of how gender biases in English, in the English language, in many parts of the English-speaking world are being replicated. So for this particular challenge, I mean, there are different ways through which it could be solved. Some examples would be ensuring that gender neutral pronouns are used when translations are done, or the attribution of a marker that shows that no gender was specified in the translation. So and then to answer the first question about gender policies on AI, I would say that, to the best of my knowledge, a lot of the efforts being carried out by African governments as it relates to AI have to, well, they are just very, I guess they're more focused on the impact of AI on the economy and development in a broad way. But there are some efforts that are being done now to consider or talk about the human rights impact of AI. But the specific, if we're talking about specific policies that focus on gender, then I would say that I personally have not come across any. But I know that efforts are growing. For instance, last month, the Nigerian government put out a call for specialists in AI and human rights to submit proposals on how to develop an AI policy in the country. And I saw that Bridget from TBI just joined. TBI is also doing amazing work in Ghana, related to African women in AI, and they have an African Women in AI Summit next week, actually, and they are very involved with governments across Africa and the Ghanaian government in exploring these themes as well. So thank you so much, Odina and Odumaru, for asking those amazing questions.
Nina, might you want to add something to that? Could you have any thoughts around that question?
Hi, Bobina. Thanks for the question and the contextualize. I thought about how to create rights and different ways to development framework ethics that respect the context. because have some discussion about the framework ethics, but I'm not defend general framework ethics, because we have different problems in different countries with different contexts. So when I said about social computer science, it's exactly about this: how to put more social science, critical things, critical opinions in computer science, to create this perspective in this perspective about contextualize the technologies. I'm not defending use drones without a framework ethics, for example. You said about Google Translate, and have some research about how Google study other cultures to create the Google Translate, and how Google put more dangerous words to create a fight between different countries. So this is very important to investigate, and how Google Translate impacts in our communication and our studies. So has a documentary on YouTube about this. I will search the title, and I will share with you, because it's an important question, how Google Translate impacts in our communication and our lives. The other point that I was thought about this is some example that Ayasha to put here, share with us. I believe in the connection between AI and technology with the past. And how can I explain this? I think in the past we had some technologies that was created from people like us, and this is not visibility, this is not shared with us. And now we have many people in the hegemonic countries create technologies against us. So it's important to thinking about AI like a possibility to preserve our language, for example, that Ayasha to said about this. This is the other ways to think more how it's possible create a frameworks ethics. I believe in frameworks in plural, because we need frameworks for Uganda, and in Uganda we need different frameworks, not only a frameworks to thinking about ethics in AI and bias in AI. Here in Brazil, we need many frameworks to think about this, because Rio de Janeiro is different from Bahia, that is different from São Paulo. So we need to respect this in computer science, respect the different contexts. This is a way to think new possibilities in AI. Sorry, I have many opinions. I have many negative opinions about AI, but I believe in this technology. But in this moment, my studies about how to fight against negative consequence, how to rethink, to save lives, to be more justice So in this moment, I believe in AI, but I'm I'm thinking more the dangerous things from AI.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess it's, I mean, easy, for example, doing the kind of work you do and engaging with, the data sets you do, the things you see, it's easy, I think, to just get into a negative loop and looking at things like that. So I understand, but I guess that's why we're having discussions like this to see, can these things be deconstructed? Is it possible to see some change around these things? So thank you for that. I'll move on to the next question. This is to you, Aisha, too.
May I add something?
Oh, yeah.
Add something to the previous question? Because I think it's very
sure.
important. When we think about artificial intelligence and the needs of the African continent, it's really important to look at big data as a key element of artificial intelligence, right? And the effective use of AI simultaneously depends on the scope and quality of the available data used to train and test algorithms. So in order for algorithms to learn from real-world data, and also historically most traditional data sets are, we can see that those historical data sets are very exclusionary and have left out women and other marginalized groups. Thus, without careful consideration of the data that informs algorithms, AI can perpetuate existing or even create new unconscious social biases. So that's why I'm always talking about data sets, because that's kind of the main building block of developing these machine learning models, for instance, or deep learning models. So when it comes to what policymakers can do, African policymakers should really contemplate the use of AI to accelerate social and economic development. And in order to do that, they need to enable the collection of gender disaggregated data and the use of outcomes of AI and other technological systems for different uses, not just for economic development, but also for other important areas. And we need support in gender research from an African perspective. We need funding for that. And as you mentioned also in the report from policy, what's really important, it's really important to have the research on the African continent. So to have universities, institutions that are based in the continent where the data will be used. Instead of having this trend now that the few African women that are experts in AI, they're leaving the continent. So it's in order for them to have perspectives, we need to create these institutions here. So it's really critical that to assess the local relevance of data and local research, and to look at it as a building block, as a beginning for developing an African AI. What does that look like? What would we develop? It's so important to have these reflections, and women need to be part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Aisha, too. And I'm in agreement. I totally think as long as we're not part of the knowledge production and contributing to the knowledge base that's not there, then the erasure continues. So I am in total agreement with that. This next question is directed to you still. And it's still Odomaro Mobanjezi. Thank you very much for your questions. It says, thanks Aisha too for that excellent presentation. I like the part of African epistemology. Some African systems of knowing, such as divination, have some similarities with the current AI and machine learning. Can AI be an avenue to exploring more about African esoteric epistemologies that were dismissed as superstition and magic?
Aishat, I think you're muted.
Okay. Now you can hear me, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was muted. I was just saying that there are actually already attempts in developing AI ethics from an African perspective. And there's one researcher called Sabelo, who is from South Africa, and he's been exploring how what we can learn from Ubuntu ethics. This idea that I am because you are. It's really important when we look at an ethical approach for AI that we're aware or that we ask ourselves the question, whose ethics are we talking about? And oftentimes, AI ethics is rooted or based in Western philosophy, or this idea of rationalism of the philosopher Descartes, who said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. It's a different starting point if you think of AI from an individualistic perspective. If you look at it from an Ubuntu philosophy, for instance, this idea of it doesn't start with I think, therefore we are, but we think because we exist. So the idea of this has different implications of the starting point of how or what kind of AI you want to develop. If it's underpinned on the idea of the collective, you're more prone to develop AI tools that serve the community, rather than developing AI tools that serve individuals or single institutions or organizations or companies. So there's so many different actually efforts being made to develop AI from a Japanese perspective, AI from, a South African perspective. I'm interested in the reason why I'm interested in proverbs, because what I found is that unlike Western philosophy, you don't have like one philosopher who claims to be part of like one direction, like Descartes or having Socrates or so on. And on the African continent, or at least I can say from the Hausa culture, the philosophy, the idea of what it means to be a human is saved in proverbs, in oral history. So that's why I'm interested in that, to extrapolate, okay, when I understand now what is written in these proverbs, what kind of AI would I develop from that perspective, for instance? So I think it would be really interesting to see what philosophies exist out there in the many communities that exist on the African continent, and to see what kind of interesting ideas come out of it. So there are some attempts. I will try to find the paper. I can put it in the chat of Sabelo, who wrote about Ubuntu AI ethics. And I think that's the first real attempt to have it from an African perspective. And I think it's a good starting point for all of us to think about what would AI ethics look like from a Hausa perspective. I'm not sure in Nigeria, because in Nigeria there are over 250 languages, so many different tribes, as we call them. You cannot even homogenize or put them all together. Each different cultural community might have its own interpretation of what AI might look like or how it wants to use it. There's some inspiration we can draw also from indigenous AI, from the Native Americans, who have also started to think about how would we use AI. We would probably also use it to preserve our culture, like chatbots. They could be used to save knowledge, to preserve culture. Someone who is in the diaspora, or even someone on the continent who doesn't want to lose connection or to the language or to the history, can use it. I haven't seen a chatbot yet that tries to teach people about the different histories that exist on the African continent. Someone has to develop that, right? But we don't have the data sets still to do it. So I'm hopeful now that I see organizations like Masakane, that is an organization focused on language and AI from the African perspective. There are many other initiatives out there that try to work. There's like an Hausa NLP community that focus on, scraping data from Twitter, creating sentiment analysis tools for hate speech detection. There's things happening. So from an ethical perspective, I think there's still work to be done. We can all start research in that area and think about, from our own vantage point, how would AI ethics look like? I hope I answered your question.
I think that's to Odomaro. I hope, you are answered in some way. There is, I think, something that was a follow-up to that very question. I'll just put it across because I think it's the last question in the chat, and then either of you three could go over it and then we can wrap this up. It says, excellent point on language preservation. Of interest to me also are African proverbs that look like tweets from our long ancestors. Can AI help collect and preserve these rare ethical codes in African languages? Aisha to Nina or policy or Favor rather. This is open for either of you to take it on. I mean, all three of you could take it on really.
Yeah, I can start. As I presented in my short presentation, I'm already reflecting on how to preserve it. So you have to look at what's available. And I can give you an example from the language Hausa. I found a book that has a really good collection of Hausa proverbs, and someone attempted already to collect the meanings. It's really important if you want to develop a data set like that to find subject matter experts. There are some, professors, some people who did even study language, who might know where to find those. And what I find really interesting in the Hausa language, there's this culture of, I think you all know Nollywood movies, but in the Hausa culture, we also have our own Kanowood, it's called. So many films that you can watch on YouTube or other channels that have like series and movies in Hausa. And there are actually series that focus only on using these proverbs, right? And there are new series being developed where you can see people developing new proverbs, because proverbs are also there to preserve, to memorize events or something interesting. So I think language is dynamic, it's ever changing. To collect them, there's so many different means. You can look in books, you can talk to people, older people, and see what kind of proverbs they remember and write it down. You can look into popular culture, movies that try to still, at least in the household culture, preserve proverbs. They're being used to say something in an indirect manner as well. Like if you live in a culture where people are not really direct in saying harsh things or truths, they use proverbs as a way to indirectly give advice to someone. So it's you can find these proverbs in different ways, and I like what you just said, using it like tweets from the ancestors. I thought that was really such a cool phrasing.
I will be faster to answer. I think yes, and I have two good examples. NLP from Ghana, a project that use NLP to create a Ghana translator. So this is a good example to preserve, and have a Yoruba language compiler that was created. Computer scientist from Nigeria. I forget the name now, but the name of the project is the Yoruba language. So this is a other way to preserve the language in computer science. Here in Brazil, unfortunately doesn't have a good example about this, because we not engaged in NLP projects, and we more engaged in the image processing projects, facial recognition projects, or predictive algorithms projects. So the artists here doesn't have the approach until now to work with these abstract projects involve technology and the art and NLP projects. But I think in the future it's a good opportunity for us here. Because here in Brazil specifically, we had a problem with creating technology here. Many developers, many AI developers go out to Brazil and create this project, and the mental to structure the project in European, in United States, and not it doesn't come back from Brazil. So this is a gap. It's different from the other places.
All right. Thank you very much for your responses to those questions, Aishatu and Nina. Favor, I don't know if you have anything to say to add to that.
Well, I noticed that Nima, sorry, I said Nima, Nina, Nina asked, I think the final question about, do you think it is possible technologies that can search for what data is missing to facilitate the organization of what is missing to continue moving towards Ubuntu ethics? And she posed that question to Aisha too. So if I think that's the final question, and once we answer that, then I guess we will be done if there are no more questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about this one. So how can technologists search for data that is missing to facilitate organizations? Yeah. Like I said, Ubuntu ethics is rooted in South African philosophy. I think it's important if you develop local solutions to see what ethics are there. So we're talking about how can technologies help organizations to identify missing data or data that they need to develop. This is a really good question. I think technologists like you and me, we can help advise them in figuring out their role. You know, what role can organizations play in collecting, curating these data sets, right? And which data sets are maybe the most urgent to get now, so that we can move more NLP applications for different areas. Yeah, I think what I would say, what your question actually says, is that we have an important role to play to more connect with people on the ground, and to also raise awareness about how they can play a role in this. Not just organizations focused on AI, but anyone who's working on the ground. How can the data that they're already collecting, how can that be used? How can the media with their radio data, how can that be already used to create speech data sets? So maybe the data is there, some of it is there, but it is not known what can be done with it. So I think it's our role as technologists as researchers to approach these organizations, media, the media, and anyone who has data available open source or not yet open source, to make a plea for that, to work together more.
All right. Thank you everyone. I think that question brought us to we're coming to the end of the session. Thank you, Favor, very, very much for obviously leading on this, giving direction to this from your report. And I think it's just interesting how the conversation has gone from, your findings and then just going around to just the other issues we've explored of digital colonialism, of, gender issues and all the other intersectional issues. And I think it's been such a rich conversation. Time has been our only limit, but it's been great to hear the work that you're doing, Aisha, too, the work that you're doing, Nina, the questions you posed, and, very critical questions for us to think about in the work we're doing around AI and African women and our continent as a whole. It's been really, really great having this discussion. I just want to close this by, I want to invite a colleague of ours, Irene, to wrap this up. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure meeting you, Aisha too, and Nina, and I hope we can keep engaging. Pleasure again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha too, Nina, and Favor, and Bobina for this wonderful session. To really reiterate again, you've really given us power to continue to think broad about our AI program policy. Favor is always sharing with us different frameworks, different, ideas. So now even this webinar is, has poked into some of the work that we'll continue to investigate. And Nina, as well as Aisha, you've really opened up and given us a chance to understand that the only limit we have is, time and just in our mind. So we'll be able to also explore the different ways we can also try to collaborate with you further for our different programs and upcoming projects, and to also see how our communities will continue to benefit, specifically some artists that we work with and other stakeholders. And in the world that I work in, I even said, one of you AI experts should be our next president, because some of the challenges we have in our politics are really need to be solved by AIs or some other forms of technologies. But once again, thank you very much. We hope to continue collaborating and continue to build this movement so that we can continue to articulate some of these challenges and innovations that African women and girls continue to develop and experience. And without much further ado, I'd like to call this nice, wonderful webinar to close. Thank you so much, and bye.